I had to learn a lot, that I had to change and choose what I should think of, where I could decide to stay in this bad state, or I could use my tools that I've learned. It was a process, and the brain does like to stay in its state. It does not like to change.
Even if that's a horrible state.
Right. It does not like it.
Because familiar is safe.
Right.
Even if it's awful.
Yeah, it feels like you're being protected when really it's harming you.
Yeah.
So it was a learning curve, but we got through it.
Yeah. Hey everybody, I'm here with Calvin and Juliebeth, and their story is really amazing and an important one for people to hear because they really struggled for a lot of time. I'm just gonna let you guys tell what you were struggling with and how you found me and what we ended up going through together and allowing Juliebeth to claim her power back.
Basically, Calvin caught on fire and burned up himself, and I saw the whole ordeal. I was able to push away my feelings, everything, while we were going through it. But once we got the okay that he was fine, that's when the depression, the recurring thoughts of the trauma from the burn happened. I was also going through some health things. We didn't know what was going on until later on. We found out that I was diagnosed with Lyme, mold, babesia, several other things. And mast cell activation. So my body was becoming to the state where everything was not safe. Shampoo, makeup, foods, except for 9 foods.
And the 9 foods was including like
Salt
oil and salt and yeah.
I remember you were on such a limited diet.
It was like 5 foods plus like oil and salt and stuff. So
it was. I remember maybe 3 foods that were actual foods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember your pain and suffering because that intensified on itself.
Right.
Because it was so fearful to think I'm never going to have a normal life again.
No, it was, and everything you would look up on the internet, it would be saying you're going to have to go to a liquid diet. You're not going to be able to eat anything ever again.
And when you were looking on the internet, you had said it was mast cell activation, and I called up a dear friend of mine who's an amazing doctor and said, hey, how do I help this woman? And she basically said, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
And she normally has solutions for everything. What else were you looking up to hopefully find answers for?
Just any type of hope, any type of relief. And too, I was looking for, I was losing a lot of hair, especially in the front of my head.
And weight. I
would go to acupuncture, and the massage lady was terrified to touch me because of how skinny I was. We didn't have a whole lot of hope. A lot of people were like, cut out all these foods. And so my doctor, she said, cut out these foods, and in 6 months, you'll slowly be able to reintroduce. That was not the case for me.
And we had also, she was itching from mast cell and stuff, and we had also, been searching for, it wasn't just Google, we had been going to places, we looked for the top doctor in Nashville, for allergist stuff, thinking it was an allergy before she was diagnosed with mast cell. And he was just pumping her full of antihistamines, and I think it was prescription strength antihistamines, and that wasn't even touching it.
No, and we went to an integrative place in Brentwood, which I had been going prior. Didn't help me. I was doing neurofeedback, biofeedback, because when you're constantly in that state, I could relive the trauma 24/7. I could go back to that place. I could remember the smell of the smoke, go back to me screaming Calvin's name. I can replay all of it over and over. It was awful. There was no relief. I was constantly in that state of fight or flight.
So how long before your symptoms really started to occur did you experience, and how did the burn situation happen?
So I guess it was before I even burnt myself, she was already having problems with just other stuff, but we didn't know what it was.
And it wasn't as severe.
So it wasn't as severe either. But it was at that point it was well, what shampoo's making me itch or something like that. It wasn't freaking out basically, right? And then after the burn, so we were burning a log in the backyard, and had got some gas splashed back on me. Long story short, so I burnt myself really bad on the side. And then after I was better was when it all came to a head. She was basically surviving before that, doing okay, and then right after that was when it just
it's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Which is often the case. In fact, there's a picture that I love in a fairly famous book. It's a cartoon of a camel with all these packages of straw on its back, and they're all labeled. One of them's, you know, toxins, one of them's not enough love, one of them's, you know, lack of self-care, stress. And so people often ask me, well, what's the number one thing I have to do to get healthy? And I love to show them that picture and just say, take the weight off the camel.
Yeah. It might not be like a burn, like for other people. It might not be a burn. It might be, you know, just a life event, just in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the thing that caused a massive downhill turn.
Right. That's finally what broke me, basically.
And then how long was it after that before you were finding yourself on this extremely limited diet, losing weight? How many medications did you find that you were exploring needing to seek help with?
We tried, I'm not sure, we tried so many different supplements, so many different medications. I think the biggest thing at the time was my mental health, because we could not.
As far as medication, she was taking a whole lot of supplements because we were at an integrated place anyway. But the problem was she couldn't even take, like, if we wanted to take like a prescription, whatever, right? Couldn't even take it because she would react so much.
So I was taking GABA, L-theanine, CBD. We had timers going constantly, just so that way I would be not in a terrible place, basically. I mean, the suicidal thoughts were constantly going too.
A perfect example of that too is we had scheduled a trip to Colorado, but we knew that wasn't, you know, a time to go. And then her happy place is Florida. So we went to Florida. You know, you'd think, well, change environment or something would help. And it was good, like Florida was still good, but we still had timers, sometimes timers, and sometimes she just knew, like, hey, I need to take CBD again or something.
Yeah.
And then, you know, with nowadays, it you know, CBD and stuff's better, but it felt like you were like almost a druggie or something, trying to find where to get your hook at or something, just to be able to calm her down. And then, you know, what was it, L-theanine and stuff like that, taking that also, just consistently.
And I remember at one point, coming off of antidepressants was a big deal.
Yes.
And I know, Calvin, you had researched a lot of support groups and wanted to get other people's opinions on that, other people's experiences on that. What was it like for both of you to navigate those waters?
I was already off when the burn and fire had happened.
Oh, okay.
But we had debated on me going back on it. And my doctor told me, if you go back on this, potentially you could lose even more foods.
The biggest thing is we didn't know what would, like, both of us was trying to figure out, should we go back on it or not? But then, you know, since she was already off for like 4 months or something, then a lot of the groups, there's a good group on Facebook that talks about it. And since she was already off of it for a certain amount of time, I think it was like a 3-month time frame, they were saying that, you know, the reaction to going back on it could be just as bad or worse than you know, staying off of it.
Right.
And she'd already been off of it, so we're like, well, let's ride the roller coaster, keep going.
Got it.
And then when we were in Florida was actually when my mom had found you, and I think that we actually called you from Florida, like, hey, can we do this? And was at that point desperate to figure out what to do.
Yeah. So what did your mother say to you that made you think, yeah, I want to give this a try? Because I had already worked with her, I think.
Yeah, I think you'd talked to her, but you hadn't, like, she hadn't seen you or anything.
Okay.
But at that point, nothing against you, but we were just desperate.
No, I mean, I get a lot of people that are desperate. Honestly,
we were just desperate.
It's helpful for me when people are desperate and willing.
We were already, like, integrative and stuff, so we were open-minded, and, you know, just open-minded in general. But then as far as, like, what brought us to you, it was like, you know, what's it gonna hurt?
Right. Well, my experience is that when people are needing a change, I always like to work with people that are at 8, 9, or a 10 need and commitment to change, because the brain likes what's familiar.
Right.
And even in your case, as much as the need was really, really high, it took a while before there was a 10,000% willingness, because the brain feels safe with what's familiar. Well, first tell us what the first session was like together, because you experienced some immediate relief.
The first session, that was the first time, even when I was little, that I'd ever experienced peace. Like, even when I was little, I was always the child who would be crying at school because someone got yelled at, like the teacher yelled at, or they got in trouble. I was very lighthearted, but constantly had that anxiety, nervousness. When we had that session, that was the first time I've ever experienced that before. I've never experienced that. And so right after I stopped taking the CBD, the GABA, L-theanine on timers, I stopped taking it completely.
You know, I'm glad we got here, but before we even got here, then I was the one that was kind of like, Juliebeth wanted something to help, but then she was still kind of like on the edge of like, you know, this, you know, we've already tried all this other stuff, this isn't gonna work kind of thing.
I didn't want to come that day.
Yeah, she didn't want to come.
He had to put
Believe
me in
me,
the car.
I like
did not want to
forced
get out
her
of the car.
in the car. You're going to this, or like, I don't know what else to do. This is the last straw. It's either a mental hospital or this.
Yeah.
Kind of, and it really
I'm
was at
so
that
glad
point.
you made it.
Yeah, it really was at that point. It was discussed. Like it was possibly mental hospital, or we're going here.
Yeah.
And when I picked her up, you know, after she saw you and stuff, she was just super quiet, and it was never the same after that.
That's so beautiful. I am so in love with this process because it's truly just opening up what's already there. I'm not injecting anything. I'm a tour guide that just brings you to what's already there inside of you, which is the truth.
Right. Something that I never realized.
Yeah.
We had the possibility of being able to access that piece.
Because old stuff just gets imprinted in the subconscious mind at an early age. And,
Yeah.
and it's just not true. And we're like iPhone 13s running around on iPhone 2 technology. And it just doesn't function until you get the upgrade. So then, and as is the case, and again, the reason I like to work with people over a few sessions is, you know, we're human beings and there's layers to things. So it's usually another layer comes up because especially
Right.
with you, you know, it was great relief,
Right.
but there were still some additional steps to take. What was that process like for you?
I had to learn a lot, that I had to change and choose what I should think of,
Mhm.
where I could decide to stay in this bad state, or I could use my tools that I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
It was a process, and the brain does like to stay in its
Mhm.
state. It does not like to change.
Even
And
if that's a horrible state.
Right.
Mhm.
It does not like it.
Because
will try.
familiar is safe,
Right.
even if
yeah.
it's awful.
Yeah, it feels like you're being protected when really it's harming you.
Yeah.
So it was a learning curve,
Mhm.
but we got through it.
Yeah. And I'm so proud of you because I know it took determination, it took guts, and I will never forget the last session where Calvin brought you here. You remember that, Calvin?
You know, I think I don't know if we talked to you about this, you know, but I was expecting like just do the thing again and fix her. Like,
Yeah.
you know, she was better than before, but like having a downhill slope again. I
Right,
should
because
say.
there were old
Going on that
trailers.
track again.
Yep,
Yeah.
it's like the farmer going to the pasture and, you know, the same tracks that he's been doing for 40 years, and, you know, he gets to the point where he just turns on the engine and that can get there by
Yeah.
itself.
Same spot. Or just
So
going down the road to
it
work.
takes
or
that
something.
quarter turn of the wheel to get on a different track, and when old frightening thoughts come up, it's just kind of habit to go back into the old
Right.
ones. So it really, really takes awareness, energy, focus, and willingness, which again is why I really, when people come desperate, then they're willing to turn that quarter turn.
Right.
Yeah.
So the third day that you came, you were half an hour early, and I saw the look on your face, Calvin.
I was like, help us now.
You were like,
Yeah.
please, I need this
It
to
was
work.
interesting. It was like the first one, like we said, it was so good. She was completely different. But then, like we were talking about, like you can go down that same path if you choose, right? And I didn't have to necessarily force you that time, I don't think.
No, like
Well,
I
the
knew
look
it
you
was
The
wanted,
look on
Yeah.
your face, you were
Yeah.
half an hour early, you were like, I'm early because if I wasn't going to get her here now, it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, it wasn't gonna happen,
And I was sipping coffee on my back patio
Yeah,
in my
you're-
sweats.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. We actually didn't even come inside because
Yeah.
I saw the state she was in. And I didn't do what I normally do. I have a lot of tools that I use because
It was a tool in a tool belt that we didn't know. It was just, it
Yeah.
just felt like more of a conversation.
Yeah, and I actually did a process that it forced you really
Right.
to make a final decision, and that was your freedom. What did it feel like to step into freedom finally?
felt amazing. Yeah, it was a relief, you know.
To finally realize you had the control.
Right.
Beautiful.
That your brain doesn't completely control. Like you have the decision. You can make the choice.
And then it was so beautiful. I don't know how many months ago, I want to say about 2, that you posted on Facebook the actual, I believe, the shirt that you were wearing, Calvin, when you got burned that
Yeah.
night.
No, it was a sweatshirt that
That you
I
were
was
wearing.
wearing.
Oh, okay.
That's been in my closet, and every time I would look at it, it would just trigger a little bit.
Mm.
Because I thought, well, I still like this sweatshirt. I could still wear it when I'm working on stuff or painting or whatever. So on the anniversary of his burn, I decided it's time to throw it away.
But you had a picture of it and you posted it on Facebook.
Yep.
And you told your whole story.
Yep.
And you got a tremendous amount of positive feedback from people.
Yeah. And I had people asking about you, and so I'd send them your information, because you can try counseling. You can go to, counseling is great. I love counseling. It's very beneficial. But I was doing so many different things, acupuncture, you can journal, but if you don't get to the root, you don't get to the unconscious, what you don't maybe not know about, or you don't know what's keeping you back, you're not going to get to the state where you should be.
And you were doing neurofeedback too. Your schedule was
Neurofeedback,
really busy.
biofeedback, acupuncture once or twice a week. Acupuncture would give me a little bit of release. Neurofeedback would help a little bit, but nothing would stay consistent.
You keep having to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How'd it feel to have a permanent relief?
Oh, it was wonderful.
And the money that it was costing you was,
Oh, yeah.
it was a huge stress and burden, wasn't it?
It was
Yeah.
big time.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now you can focus on just running your life and enjoying your life and plugging yourself into the things you want to plug yourself into.
And we can go back to church. I couldn't even be at church. We couldn't be around children, babies, or anything like that.
Because
After looking at the Lyme and babesia mast cell, that can be not an option. So
yeah,
we don't know
Triggers,
what
I
God
guess you would
has
say.
in store. We'll just
Yeah.
see.
yeah. I remember that was a heartbreaking thing that you felt like you were living in total limitation
Oh yeah,
and like it was just closing in on you and getting worse. Is that correct?
that's completely correct.
And
We couldn't go.
that created a feeling of total desperation.
Right, we couldn't go to restaurants. We couldn't eat anywhere. I would have to eat food at home. It was sweet potatoes, chicken, fresh green beans. You couldn't do the canned. It wasn't good.
So if you were to pick up the phone and talk to Juliebeth right before you came here, where you were still on the fence, what would you say to that Juliebeth to say you need to do this?
This is your missing puzzle piece. You've tried so many different things, but if you just go here, you'll feel the peace that you've never felt before.
And if the old Juliebeth says, why, I don't get it. I get it that worked, but why?
Because it's so important to find out who you are and to finally blossom the person you should be. What God created you to be.
Is there anything else you want to just tell people that may be struggling or suffering?
There's hope. You aren't doomed forever to live in a life that's full of turmoil, of reliving trauma constantly, to be in the state of suicidal thoughts and depression and anxiety. That's not, God didn't create you to be like that. He loves you. He cares for you. Please go here. That's my best. I've been to all sorts of doctors in Nashville. I've tried so many different things, and I'm not saying doctors aren't helpful. They can be very helpful. I'm not saying stop taking your antidepressants no, don't do that. I'm just saying there is hope. Give it a try.
Yeah.
I remember the first time that it was a little bit after, basically, like, I didn't talk about it very much because I didn't want to, like, poke the bear and then something happened or whatever. It was like, I wanted to ask how she's doing, but I didn't want to be, like, intrusive, right? And then one time she just woke up and I was like, I did ask, like, how you feeling or something like that. And she's like, I don't have anxiety or depression. Like, it's not there.
Well, thank you so much. I know you're both extremely busy people. You've got a whole life full of activities and projects, and I thank you for taking the time out to share your story.
Yeah.
And folks, if you got value out of this, please click the like button, please subscribe, and we'll see you at the next interview.
Thank you.
Bye.